Welcome to JPC Online. In this video, we will be making homemade Razor Clam Chowder.
So I'm going to go through the ingredients as we use them. This is 2 or 3 tablespoons of bacon grease, a stick of butter, and 1 clove or 1 whole garlic minced. The next ingredient is about 3 to 3.5 cups of sliced celery. The next ingredient is about 3 to 3.5 cups of sliced onions. This is followed by about 1/2 cup of chopped shallot. We then use 16 ounces of clam juice. We use 32 ounces of half and half. Our next ingredient is 32 ounces of heavy cream. We make a roux out of 1 cup of flour and 1 stick of butter. Next, we will add the spices, which consist of fresh chopped basil, pepper, salt, oregano, tarragon, and thyme. Our next ingredient is an all-purpose spice. Our next ingredient is diced potatoes. We use about 8 cans of these potatoes. Our next ingredient is about 1.5 pounds of chopped bacon, cooked so that it's just cooked but not crunchy. Our next ingredient is chopped razor clams. This is about 45 razor clams, so I believe that is about 2.5 pounds of meat. Okay, we're going to set the heat level to about 4 to 4.5 and start with our ingredients. Butter, chopped garlic, and our bacon grease. Let that heat up and let the butter melt. Okay, our butter is almost melted. We will help a little bit by cutting it into a couple smaller pieces. Here we go, and we'll add our first ingredient, which is the celery. The recipe that I adapted calls for sauteing the celery for 10 minutes. So what I'll do is I'll put a timer on my microwave for 10 minutes. And I'll come and make sure that I keep stirring it every minute or so. Also, I forgot to mention this stock pot, I believe, is 8 quart. So we're about 4 minutes into the 10-minute timer for the sauteing of the celery, and we'll give it a good mix up here. So it's been about 8 minutes of the 10-minute timer, and the celery is almost cooked down to the point where we can add our next ingredient. So it's been 10 minutes. Now we'll add our next ingredient. This is the shallot. And the onions. We'll mix this around. And we'll also do a 10-minute timer on this. Okay, we're about 5 minutes into this 10-minute timer, and we'll give it a little stir. You can see the onions are starting to cook down. Okay, we're at the end of our 10-minute timer, so we will shut off the timer and go on to our next ingredients. At this point in time, we'll give it a couple stirs and start adding our liquids. So we start out with the clam juice, the heavy cream, and our half and half. Now this is the recipe that I follow. I think that you could use vitamin D milk and heavy cream. Okay, so our liquids have been added. What we do at this point is we want this to rise in temperature almost to a boil, and at the same time we are going to work on our roux. So we are going to put the back burner on and slide the stock pot back, and then make the roux on the front burner. Okay, to make the roux, what we're going to do is use a stick of butter, and we will let that melt down to liquid and then add our flour. Okay, once the butter has melted, we will add, this is approximately 1 cup of flour, and we will start to mix that right into the butter. And what we want to do is create like a thick paste. So the flour has incorporated into the butter, and what I do is just continuously mix this, and we want this to start to smell nutty, and that's the only way I can describe it. So it usually takes about 5 minutes, and we'll just keep mixing that. We want to keep on working the roux and keep on mixing it up. Okay, so the roux's been cooking for a couple of minutes. What we're going to do now, just because the front burner on this stove is much more powerful than the back, is we will shift the pots again and increase our temperatures and keep on stirring the roux as needed. So we'll go back to our main pot, and you'll see that the temperature is about 137 degrees right now. And like I said, we don't want this to boil, but we want to get it to the point where when we start mixing everything, the liquid will become thicker. So I'm going to give you a quick view of the roux. It definitely is starting to give off that aroma that you want to smell and thicken up. So what we're going to do is just take the heat off this, and the burner still will have the residual heat, so it will cook a little further. Okay, so it's been on the burner for a couple of minutes. We're going to give it a little bit of a temperature probe here, and you can see that it is about 165 degrees. So what we're going to do now, we're going to keep the heat on there, but we're going to start to add our spices. So this was the basil, the thyme, the parsley, and the other things that I listed before. And what we'll do is we'll start to mix these. Okay, after the spices, what we'll do is we'll add the roux right into it. And this is where everything gets incorporated. So after adding the spices and the roux, we will start to mix everything up. And what I've noticed is that when the spices start to get incorporated into the cream, meaning that the spices sort of disappear, that's when everything starts to thicken up. So we'll just keep mixing this until we start to see that process. Okay, we can continue mixing everything up. I would think that this process probably is about 5 minutes. You can see some of the spices are starting to incorporate. Okay, more mixing. Okay, so we've been mixing this for about 6 or 7 minutes, and you can see that a lot of the spices are incorporated. Some of the big parsley and the big pieces of basil are still visible, but you can see how it's gotten a lot thicker. So at this point in time, I'm going to add the potatoes. And I'm going to add the bacon. So I have to do this in this order because I have a couple of people in the family that don't like certain or can't have certain ingredients. So I'll mix in the potatoes and the bacon. And the potatoes are basically cooked from the can, so they just need to actually just warm up. And at this point in time, I will actually take some of the clam chowder out. This is almost a finished product, but my son's girlfriend actually doesn't like clams. So I told her I would save her some without any of the clams in there. So that's a good amount. Okay, So the last ingredient is the actual clams. Now these, what I've found is that they cook within a minute or so. So they don't need to be in early at all. So we will just go and separate that big chunk of clams. And you can see, like I said earlier, this is a very thick clam chowder. So I mixed up all the clams. We're going to let that cook down, or we're going to let that simmer for a couple minutes just to make sure all those clams get cooked. Okay, this has been basically simmering for a couple minutes. This has been simmering for a few minutes, so the clams should be cooked. And what we'll do now is, we haven't added any pepper to this whole mixture yet. My mother-in-law can't have pepper, so we'll take some out for her. And then we will add a bunch of pepper. We like pepper in the family, so I would assume this is a couple of, maybe 1 tablespoon. Normally this would go in with the normal spices, but because we need to separate the final product before the pepper goes in, we'll add it at the end here. Okay, so we mixed in all the pepper, and that's basically the final product. What we'll do is we'll just put this on a very low and simmer it for a few minutes, but start to finish, after everything has been prepared, all the celery and onions have been cut, is probably about 40 to 45 minutes. Hope you like it, and we're gonna go have some lunch now. So here's our bowl of clam chowder, and we add a little bit more pepper. This is my personal preference. And then there's a famous restaurant on the Oregon coast here that adds little packets of butter to your clam chowder when you order it, and it just makes it a little bit more flavorful. So I like to do that at home.